Welcome everyone to Aspire Leadership Consulting. We are a business consulting agency that's particularly based in Virginia. And today we're here with the YAB, or the Youth Advisory Board, which is connected to Aspire Leadership Consulting. Currently, as a group, we specialize in bolstering youth leadership in the business sphere with interactive workshops, discussion, and focusing on youth engagement. Today, we will be exploring the perspectives of college-bound students on various topics, including social entrepreneurship, AI's impact, social skills, mental health, and the future job market. So join us to uncover how the next generation is preparing to shape and navigate the challenges of tomorrow. Before we start into our discussion, let's start off with a quick introduction. So, Catherine, do you want to go first?
I'd be happy to. Hello, everyone. My name is Catherine Buckman. So on the Youth Advisory Board, I serve as the Director of Community Outreach, which has been an amazing and fulfilling position. This upcoming year as a freshman, I'm so excited to say that I will be attending Columbia University as a John Jay Scholar, and I hope to study a combination of political science, economics, and philosophy. I'd say my favorite thing about being on the board so far has just been meeting all of these people. I think that in high school it can kind of be monotonous, just hanging out with the same people every day, but having an opportunity to talk with the future generation, the next minds, it's been an amazing experience.
Darby.
Hi, my name is Darby. These past few years, I've been the youth engagement manager, so I just make sure everybody has a role on the board and everybody's getting involved in discussion and whatnot. This fall, I'm going to be going to Amherst College, and I want to study biochemistry. I'd say my favorite thing from the board, a little bit similar to Catherine, is hearing everybody's perspectives. We all met through the same organization, so I think seeing where everybody has gone and where we've come from has been really interesting.
Sanvi.
Hi, my name is Sanvi. These past 2 years, I've been working part in social media and outreach for the Youth Advisory Board. Next year, I will be going to VCU as an honors college student and will be studying biology on the pre-med track. And my favorite thing being part of this board is definitely aligning with what Catherine and Darby has said, meeting these people, talking through these discussions about their perspective on certain issues that we're all interested in is something that was really interesting to learn and go through these past few years.
I can go. So, hi everyone. My name is Samik Das. I'll be attending Johns Hopkins University in the fall. I'm majoring in neuroscience and on the pre-med track. Particularly, my role in the board has mainly been on the business side. I've worked with Jennifer mostly on like giving her advice on quarterly advice or financial advice. But also, I think a really cool factor of this has been that we've been able to interact with a lot of business professionals and even um, people in the community. Like, for example, we were able to interact with the mayor of Roanoke, which is not something you get to do every day. And I feel like that's the most important thing, that our youth voice is really present. And in terms of today, I'll be the moderator, so you can see me posing some interesting questions that are actually really important for our generation. Prince.
So I can go next. My name is Prince. I'm currently a junior in high school, so I will not be participating in this meeting. Though I do act as the social media manager for YAB. I currently run the Instagram. As my favorite thing on this board, it kind of just aligns with what everyone else is saying with Sonic and Sanvi and Darby and Catherine, kind of just interacting with you guys since we've been together for the past year, kind of just learning about more about the workplace environment, learn more about what we'll do in our adult life. I think that's really what interests me about this leadership board. So yeah.
And that leaves me. I'm Jennifer Ono-Quill. I'm the president and founder of Aspire Leadership Consulting, and I've been working with this group since 2022. So it's a group of high school juniors and seniors from across the state of Virginia who are interested in learning about how youth can impact a youth voice and how youth can impact the future decision makers and the ways that they think about the world and the future of their own professional lives, but also how to influence the world around them. And so we gather 4 times a year to have these conversations. It's good to see all of you today, and good to have this time with our seniors to hear about their thoughts about the world.
So to give a brief overview of some of the topics we'll be covering, so everyone is also aware, the first topics kind of focus more on social entrepreneurship and AI, and then we kind of dive into our generation, especially the social skills or the people skills, and then we're kind of ending off with how we feel about the social anxiety, especially the rise with social media, and also the automation of future jobs. And we'll basically kind of make sure it's a free-flowing conversation, and everyone will be contributing. So to start off, I think Jennifer has a question that all of us want to talk about is social entrepreneurship.
Yeah, I'll kick off with a couple of thoughts here. Social entrepreneurship, the idea that you can connect your business outcomes and intersect profitability with what's best for the people and the planet, those things, how we drive as leaders to be able to create the world that we want our children to inherit, that's really what centers my work. And when I started my firm, I wanted that to be at the center of my practice. And so that's actually why the Youth Advisory Board exists. For me, it was important as a leader to be accountable to that generation in real time. So to have conversations with this group of people and to really think about the things that matter to them as I'm making my own business decisions, and then to have their thinking and reflection on some of the client work that I do. And also to help them figure out ways that as youth, in different ways, they can influence in their own communities and in their roles that they have more broadly. And so that's a piece of what I wanted to do and for this particular thing. But I think social entrepreneurship is also rapidly emerging as a interest in the world. And so I'm just curious what interests the rest of the group about social entrepreneurship and how that might intersect with your own professional futures.
I am more than happy to start if no one else has anything to say. Okay, so I completely agree with everything that Jennifer has said. And I think that social entrepreneurship really is a novel concept. And I think that we're lucky to be able to experience it in this modern day, a business that can be both lucrative as well as good for the environment and sustainable. So I agree with Jennifer that social entrepreneurship is evolving rapidly. And I think we can trace a lot of this to modern education. And I, as a youth, and you all as students, can probably agree that modern education really emphasizes lots of things, and these things are critical pillars of social entrepreneurship. So for example, I think that leadership, there's so much emphasis on leadership in modern education. And leadership is one of the fundamental principles of social entrepreneurship. So as we're growing into adults and as we're in our education, we're experiencing all of these amazing opportunities. We're encouraged to pursue leadership, and this is setting us up for futures of social entrepreneurship. Other things, I feel like social impact and service have become huge parts of the modern education system. So I know, like all of you, I've just gone through the process of applying for college. One of the biggest things that I know colleges look for are volunteer hours. And after a while, it can become a checkbox, but at the same time, we notice that educational institutions are prioritizing service and impact. And in this way, they're setting us up for futures of social impact and service and leadership, which all tie into social entrepreneurship. So I know I mentioned earlier that I'm hoping to study politics, political science, economics, philosophy, and I'm hoping to tie all of this into a future of sustainable bioethic practices. So I love the idea of perhaps pursuing law and advocating for bodily autonomy, reproductive rights, rights to health, who gets to decide when to end their life, where to end their life, things that I'm really passionate about. And I think that my education and the way that I was brought up, learning about leadership, learning about service has really pushed me down this path of social entrepreneurship.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree from both Jennifer and Catherine's point, partly because in the last 10, 15 years, social entrepreneurship was previously viewed more as corporate social responsibility or CSR, which was like the company kind of being forced to, or the corporate sector being forced to care for social impact or social concern. But definitely in today's generation, it's kind of been drilled into our education or almost instilled into our everyday lives to always think about social values and think about social concern. And in terms of what I've seen in various industries, whether it's business or even healthcare, I feel like a lot of the businesses or kind of hospitals are kind of transforming their next steps to think more about social concern. And specifically, in at least in my field, medicine or healthcare, it has definitely become more of a field where they're looking for service. It's always been known that medicine is the field of service, but now they're looking to kind of see how much attention are you paying to social concern or social impact. And a lot of these essays that they're asking in med school applications or even in interviews kind of show what the new doctors they want kind of think. They want you to be thinking about what the kind of disparities are present in healthcare and how can we as future leaders bridge those disparities, not only racial disparities, but also socioeconomic disparities. And they're looking to kind of focus not only on urban healthcare, but rural healthcare, which kind of shows that social entrepreneurship is definitely driven across not only in the business industry, but a multitude of industries, including healthcare.
I really feel like, I mean, I agree with both of you. I feel like I've seen it my whole life in education and preparing for college, this stress on being a member of your community and giving back to that community. But I feel like I've seen it in other aspects of my life too. Like, even in just social media, there seems to be more stress, at least that I've seen recently, on, I don't want to say being a good person, but you know what I mean? Focusing on social concerns or even environmental concerns. Like, I remember there was all this stuff about little bracelets you'd buy and they like take plastic out of the ocean or whatever, and just stuff like that. I feel like I see it everywhere now, and it's become a big part of my life. Um, in almost every way. I mean, every time I open social media, I see it. Like I said, school, we see all these people holding corporations accountable. So I don't know. I just feel like it's all around us, and there's been more of a stress on these concerns recently. So I feel like it's just become a bigger part of everybody's life. And unless you're willfully ignoring it, it's really hard to not engage in it and want to help.
Yeah, I agree with what everyone has been saying about like education. It's definitely been instilled in us to follow those leadership and service and character. And also I agree with like Darby, what she was saying about like social media, especially with the rise in these past decades and probably a little bit before, but it's definitely been increasing the use of social media for activism, advocating for our beliefs in both healthcare, business, politics, kind of everything, but it's just like kind of bringing everyone together in a platform that everyone can just connect with each other over things that they believe in, while also kind of just making sure that they can give back in ways that are convenient to them, but also kind of just like um, in a way that is bringing everyone together to do it at once, I think. So I think definitely through like social media and healthcare, it's definitely in every aspect that we can see.
Yeah, so I mean that's quite interesting how a lot of us have a variety of perspectives of social entrepreneurship, but we all kind of agree on how it's definitely become more of an instilled trait in our generation. And I'm kind of curious how can we as a generation balance both social impact, given that it's connecting people across borders, and also at the same time pursue financial sustainability or in layman's terms, profit. So how can we really balance both profit and social impact in today's very chaotic atmosphere?
I'm happy to comment on that. So like I said before, and I think Salmik, like you said, the idea of social entrepreneurship is novel. It's completely revolutionary. If we think back to the Industrial Revolution, businesses back then had absolutely no care for human welfare at all. So to consider how far we've come since then, it's revolutionary. It's amazing. It really is. But that being said, because it's so modern, we're still trying to find this balance between a lucrative business and a business that helps people. And so I think that the root of this can be traced almost to the business idea in itself. When businesses are forming, they have to come up with ideas that are sustainable. And I think sustainability might be one of the most fundamental pillars of social entrepreneurship. It's important for businesses to find target audiences and business ideas that are ethical, sustainable, but help people as well. While also finding things that are lucrative and can make money. So I think that my suggestion is that sustainability is the core pillar of modern social entrepreneurship.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with Catherine's point, just because sustainability has not only been like, a lot of people have the common notion to think that sustainability is focused only on the environment or only on food, but I think it's pretty evident in a lot of industries, whether it's more on rural sustainability or urban sustainability. So designing earth-friendly cities, that's a big deal right now, especially with people focusing on how we can better live our lives. So definitely sustainability is carrying forward social entrepreneurship. And I definitely agree that it's at the core of where people are able to find that sort of niche balance, whether it's kind of making sure that there's a social impact present, but also making sure that it's not financially lucrative, but more rather it gets the job done.
Yeah, I agree with both of you guys have said that sustainability is at like the core. And I think one of like the main ways that people can kind of create that balance is making sure that we're understanding the needs of the people and the environment that we're living in, and making sure that we're not damaging it without, considering all the aspects of the problem, and making sure that financial stability, environmental stability, sustainability, sorry, are all being factored into the equation, along with balancing that social impact and making sure we're giving back, but not damaging the society as well.
So, of course, I agree with you all. I think that it's important for businesses to find a way to make themselves sustainable and have some kind of social impact. And I think that social entrepreneurs who are just starting and who are just creating their organizations are probably going to have pretty hard time finding funding and ways to get started. But I think the internet is making that easier. I think it's easier for people now to connect all over the world to find people who want to invest in them and to share their beliefs. And I think it's going to, like, as we continue, become increasingly easier to create these businesses that easily balance the social impact and financial sustainability.
I'm curious to now kind of ask, now that we're college-bound students, how do you think social entrepreneurship is evolving in the sense that are we paying more attention to social concern? And are there any particular examples of social enterprises that have not only impressed you, but kind of made an impact or made a statement in this field? And especially Catherine mentioned sustainability. Are there any kind of standpoints that we should pay attention to and use as an example for our generation? I can kind of piggyback off that if no one has, and you guys can keep thinking. But I think a big example is a lot of these companies that are manufacturing water bottles, they have really made their brand statement to focus on being eco-friendly. And I think that has been a big pillar in making sure that the generation of consumers is paying attention to social concern. So it's kind of interesting to see how people who are also starting businesses are paying attention to social concern, but people who are also managing businesses are making sure that the generation is paying attention to social concern, which I think is pretty interesting considering that both are on opposite ends of the consumer spectrum. So I think that's pretty fascinating.
I can sort of piggyback off of what Samik said, and I agree that it's interesting to kind of find this new balance with social entrepreneurship. So as you were speaking, something came to mind, and that is this modern emphasis on sustainability with clothing. So there's lots of brands that now promote, oh, our clothing is sustainably sourced, and that's a kind of sustainability that I don't think often comes to mind. Like Samik said, we lots of times think of environmental sustainability. But sustainable clothing comes in the form of not using child labor, not outsourcing labor, and underpaying workers. And I think that it's really interesting to see how modern concerns for the welfare of other people, the humanitarian needs of other people in other countries are being seen and being heard by these companies who are now making efforts to sustainably source their clothing and their products.
I agree with what both of you guys have said. And I think something that kind of ties both of those issues together is how social media brings awareness to said issues and the need for sustainability in both clothing, environmental sectors, and every other aspect. I think bringing awareness and how we're able to advocate for the issues that we're facing kind of allows businesses to look at that and then evaluate the situation and provide the necessary changes to kind of target those audiences and make sure that those issues are being resolved and kind of mitigating the
I really don't have anything to add. You all covered most of it. I feel like most social enterprises are, I mean, in themselves pretty impressive. They all, I mean, they're all so different, but they act pretty similarly and they all try to push social change. So
Yeah, so if no one else has any closing words, then I think Jennifer would want to close off this topic.
It's been a rich conversation on this topic. I appreciate your thinking and a couple of data points that might be helpful to just be aware of. There's a client that SGS is a lab testing, international lab testing organization, global business. And part of their annual report, because it's in their values, reports out their business metrics as it relates to the International Declaration of Human Rights. So there are ways that for-profit industry are thinking deeply and critically on the balance sheet. Sometimes it's not the most common, but social economics is another way to add human capital to the positive side of the balance sheet as opposed to the expense side of the balance sheet. So there are some ways that there are deeper thoughts about how we even describe what profit is and what that looks like. And it will be interesting how the coming generation where it takes that body of work and applies it as across different industries. Trying to find ways, that number of entrepreneurs also like driving the future of micro economies, but also the American economy. And something, I think the number is 43% of entrepreneurs identify themselves as operating inside of a social concern. So I think that's an interesting number. And a number of lives where you hear different numbers at different times, but it's 62 million lives impacted by social entrepreneurs, or up to 1 billion lives anticipated impacted by social entrepreneurs in 2025. Those are very large in terms of scale and impact. Those are really big numbers about the consequences of the effort that's being made. The other piece of it, and it sort of transitions to something I know Samik was interested in exploring next, and so I'll share this at the top and then turn it back over to you, Samik. The social entrepreneur and the broader thought, social responsibility of organizations, and the importance of really interdisciplinary learning in that capacity. And so one of the things that's happens in that transition from high school to college is the beginning of specialization, and how that then relates to what happens next for the decision makers and drivers of and the social forces that are at work inside of businesses. And if businesses become very specialized without that interdisciplinary approach, what do they lose in terms of their ability to even have insight into social responsibility, which, as I've heard all of you name, various drivers from economic to agricultural, rural, urban, technical, there's just a variety of things that each of you have mentioned over the course of this conversation that have implications. And how do we have decision makers and really, whether that's a corporation or a NGO or government, thinking more broadly about the impact and implications well beyond their subject matter and their product into how that cascades through a community. And that sort of leads us to this next topic. So Somik, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of brought it up really well that social entrepreneurship is becoming a new trait of our generation. And I feel like another idea that has particularly been instilled in this interdisciplinary learning is AI. AI has continuously been one of the biggest factors that have been associated with our generation, just because of the development and the timeline, but also because of its growing usage and people kind of being confused on how to use it, but also being very skeptical. But at the same time, we're seeing so much possibility and so much opportunity with AI. So I'm really curious to know, how do you guys see AI being integrated in your curriculum in school so far? And do you think there's a potential for later in college as well?
I am happy to comment. And I looked through the sheet earlier and I was really excited to see this question because I think I have a unique perspective on the issue. So for the past year, I served as the first student representative on my county school board. And so I was, I think, 16 and 17 at the time I served, and everyone else on the board was, I think, 60 or above. And so, of course, naturally, the question of AI came up, and I was really surprised with the way that it was approached, and not in a good way. So I think to an extent, unfortunately, older generations almost can't comprehend AI and its uses. And I think as such, this makes them really scared of it. So when the discussion of AI came up, I advocated for its implementation in schools because it is a reality of the modern world. And as such, I think students should be prepared to tackle it head on. And I was surprised to see that every other board member completely disagreed, and restrictive, prohibitive policies were put in place to completely outlaw ChatGPT, other AI generative technologies in our school. And so unfortunately, I think this is a reality in many schools, as it is in my school district. As a youth, as a student, I tend to disagree with this train of thought. And I'm of the opinion that students should be taught early on how to ethically, morally use generative AI and ChatGPT, because it's a reality of the world, of the workplace. I think it's unfair to let students just go out into the world blind and then be confronted with AI and ChatGPT in workplaces. Not only that, I think that students who don't have like an in-depth understanding of AI technologies and generative technologies will be put behind in the workforce. I think, in fact, it's a complete detriment when they're not given the opportunity to learn these skills. So that is my opinion, and it's a strong one.
Yeah, I do agree that teaching like the students and people in schools and colleges, teaching them young how to adapt to this new version of our society or in the modern world, that we have to make sure that we're adapting to these changes instead of being thrown into the AI world without knowing how to navigate it, which is being done in the workforce right now. People are kind of scrambling to understand how these changes are going to implement their workforce. how they're going to be able to work or maybe lose a job. And that's kind of been like the past kind of problem that people are facing. So I feel like I agree with what Catherine is saying. Yeah. Kind of making sure that they're learning it both ethically and morally, how to navigate AI kind of allows for a smoother transition for the younger generations and the current generations to have a more modernized and functioning society.
Yeah, I think AI, of course, it can be used horribly wrong, and students, I'm sure, use it to cheat. I mean, I know I've seen classmates, but I think it's becoming an increasingly important, and we know it'll be used in the workplace. So, like you said, we need to know how to use it ethically so that people don't use it in the wrong ways, but they also need to be familiar with it so that when they are faced with it in the workplace, they know how to use it in like a technical way to have it as a tool.
So I want to just dig in here because I've heard from all of you actually this theme of ethics and morals and how that intersects with AI. How do you imagine that part of it being engaged and taught along with the technology in schools?
I'm happy to tackle that one. So I think that we would need to approach the issue or the opportunity of generative AI in much the same way that we approach a lot of other moral and ethical issues. I think that students should be introduced to it with lessons and understanding of what is and what is not correct. And so because of how new it is, we really don't know what is and what is not ethical pertaining to generative AI. What counts as an idea from generative AI is that the idea of the AI, do you have to source that, or do you have to, or is that technically your own idea? Do you have to cite it? So I think that by allowing students to have those kinds of discussions, to ask their teachers, ask themselves, well, what is ethical? How do we determine what is ethical? And then move forward from there while giving students an opportunity to experiment with it. Perhaps they can take home assignments, use ChatGPT or other generative AI, but do it in a way that is ethical. Don't copy and paste the question, maybe use the editing software or ask for some ideas or ask for some quote recommendations. And then this way students are growing up introduced to this AI and also able to use it ethically.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with Catherine. I think a lot of the new teachers that I'm seeing, and particularly our school system, has made a kind of fine line between using AI ethically and not ethically. And a lot of the initiatives they're taking is for example, they'll ask the students to write down the prompts that they're using with ChatGPT so they're aware of what prompts that they're prompting the AI to kind of spit out information. And then also there's been a new trend and new sort of establishment how we should cite AI. So it's definitely becoming more integrated in our curriculum. And I like Catherine, I also have a pretty unique perspective on AI. Particularly from my research background, I've seen it a lot being used in machine learning, and it's kind of been evident that AI is definitely being incorporated not only in various businesses, but it's very much evident in research that we're using it to kind of rail out data and kind of crunch the numbers. So it's definitely something that's being used in the science industry. And the other perspective I'd say that's kind of quite interesting is I serve as a business mentor as part of our Chamber of Commerce in our county, and I kind of see youth entrepreneurs, but also older entrepreneurs who come in and they're looking for advice. And a lot of the businesses that I've mentored over the past maybe 6 or 7 years have really, you can kind of see the trend where AI started kicking up in the last couple of years. And it was that all these new apps are sort of developing how to use AI and using it to their advantage. And I think that's quite interesting because one of the ideas was like a kid had came in and he was like, I'm building an app that can read EKGs using AI, which is kind of mind-blowing given that EKGs take quite a lot of training to read, and having AI to read the interpretation of what your heart looks like is kind of mind-blowing. So I think AI is definitely being treated as a baby, but it will become something that everyone is being involved in more. If no one has any comments on that, I can definitely pose the next question, which is, how do you think AI will impact not only our next generation, but more specifically the job market? Where do you guys see AI in terms of employment opportunities?
I'm happy to take this. So I think earlier we talked about the balance with social entrepreneurship, and I think again the idea of balance comes into this question. So on one hand, the introduction of AI into businesses will undoubtedly improve efficiency. I'm sure there's many ways, exactly as Samik just mentioned, the EKG reading. That's revolutionary. That's amazing in the medical field. And there are so many other instances of technology being introduced that have amazing impacts on the workforce or on the business industry and efficiency. For example, the opportunity to self-checkout in stores is amazing and it's efficient, but we have to keep in mind, again, this idea of balance, because when we introduce these new technologies, for example, again, in the store, we are replacing what are workers. And so we have to go into the idea of this introduction of technology, realizing that we have to find a balance between using technology to improve lives, improve efficiency, while also not putting people out of jobs. So I think that the result of this will be a boom, a massive boom in the cyber industry, the technology industry. And so in a way, this is opening up many more jobs. This is encouraging education, but at the same time, we're going to see other jobs, jobs that are expendable and can be replaced by technologies. People are going to lose those jobs, and we might see unemployment rise in that way. So I think there will be a fine balance trying to juggle how much AI to introduce without putting people out of jobs.
To piggyback on Catherine on what you just said, the other part of it, and I'll use that self-checkout, right? It seems to be coming to clarity that there's more loss with being self-checkout. And what does it mean to then, if you don't have a human interaction, then doing the work and being the worker yourself, and being then supervised in a way as a customer? Like, what does that sociologically do to the way you even feel about the business and whether you care about the business, right? And so I do think that there's an underdeveloped sociological reflection. And some of that has to do with, if we are moving in this technologically integrated evolution of humanity, what are the subject matter competencies that we want the decision makers to have that are making these decisions? Because if there had been a sociologist thinking about the implication of that decision, would they have been able to forecast that result and then interrupt a role of just looking at one direction in a linear way of, if we just have the machine do this and we replace the people, then we only have to pay to maintain the machine. But now human beings are doing the work that are customers. And so how does that also then disrupt how people even feel about the business? So what are the other, I'd like to dig into that in really many of the ways that AI might disrupt, but what are the kind of competencies that you think would be important that are beyond the particular technological competencies in order to make resilient and thoughtful decisions?
I can take it. So I liked this question when I saw it, and I thought it was really interesting because a lot of times I think that we consider AI to be like completely foolproof, when in reality it lacks many things that simply cannot be replicated. So For example, humans have the opportunity to critical think. And in school, I've taken entire classes on problem solving and critical thinking. And so I think our leaders can't be replaced by AI simply because AI cannot critical think and problem solve in the way that we can. And with this natural problem solving and critical thinking comes communication skills, collaboration skills, interpersonal skills. And these are pretty much the foundation of society, the way that we interact with one another. That builds the functioning society that we have now. And AI simply can't duplicate that. So I think in that way, we are unique and we are different from AI. And I think that it's important that our leaders have all of these qualities and these skills.
Yeah, I definitely agree. One of the particular assets of AI that we don't see is the human touch, which has been a consistent factor well before our time, and that human touch and that empathy that is really important for us humans to have, that is not being seen in AI, at least now. And they've definitely tried to work on adding that sort of nature, but it's never been the same when you don't have that face-to-face interaction or that human interaction. And I feel like that is the biggest skill that we need to have, and that is social skills. We need to be able to continue those people skills and be able to make sure that AI simply is used as a technological innovation and not over or intrude into our actual human interactions. And I think that's the biggest necessity of skill sets that are particularly needed in a AI-driven workplace.
Yeah, I agree. Kind of understanding that balance between what is actually needed for that connection and the human touch compared to the AI generated person. I feel like that understanding that the leaders understanding that there's a wider range of skills and necessities that we have to kind of accomplish before we can just enter it into like a computer and kind of just like instead of just using the machine or the AI generated technology devices and stuff, we kind of have to make sure that we're evaluating all sides of stuff and kind of making sure that we have that human kind of critical thinking skills that Catherine was saying, being able to work those problems out from the human side, makes sure that the technology side is done in a way that is making that connection stronger.
Yeah, I'd say it's important for leaders to understand the shortcomings of AI. They don't have to know everything about it or be tech gods or anything like that. But I think they definitely need to understand, like I said, the shortcomings. So the lack of human connection and soft skills and communicating in a way that's human. And also other things, like we said earlier, circling back to ethics, understanding shortcomings that AI may have in that way, like how it intersects with privacy concerns or even bias that it might have or anything like that.
So I think this is a good closing on our discussion of AI. If no one has any other words, I think we kind of hit the next topic, which was definitely the human touch or the interaction. And I think the people skills or the social skills of our next generation has been a important topic of discussion, not only amongst our generation, but people who are older than us who are part of the hiring force of the workplace. And I think it's become a big discussion topic. And the first question that I'd like to pose to the group is, do you feel like your education, whether it be your high school, middle school, elementary, or anywhere outside of your education, but particularly your 18 years before you go to college, has adequately prepared you with the social skills you think you need for the workplace? And if so, why? If not, why? We can also start from a workplace perspective if Jennifer, you want to jump in.
Your audio cut for a minute, Somek.
I was going to say, if we want to start from a workplace perspective, you can definitely start off.
Yeah, I'll just speak generationally briefly, and I'm curious for you guys to be thinking a little bit about as you step into the workplace or into college, what is it that would be helpful as you are getting feedback for improvement? I remember my first college writing course, and I'd always gotten a lot of praise for my writing skills, and the grade I got back did not match my experience. And she said, "This is college," and so the level up of the expectation is different, and then the workplace is yet another thing. So, what are effective tools or experiences for you to actually receive feedback and have and grow in your confidence there? And I'll share the thinking right now, or the data says, right, generationally, that answer is more frequent feedback and incremental feedback. But I'm just curious, from your point of view, there's a lot of feedback that you get in your daily life with social media. There's also a fair amount of surveillance that happens in your world that is not something that the generations before you experienced. So I'm just curious how that then impacts how feedback and development of skills feels. What's productive ways to do that?
I'm happy to contribute thoughts. So as you were speaking, this kind of came to mind for me. And it's almost a little bit out of the box, but I think that the entire structure of our grading system is sort of flawed and goes along with this criticism that isn't necessarily helpful. And it ties into a lot of points on academic achievement. So I think that the way that the modern education system functions is we are given knowledge, it is like poured into us, and then we're just asked to regurgitate it on tests to receive a grade. And that grade almost serves as our criticism of our knowledge. And we are graded on how well we think we know, or how well that they interpret we know that knowledge. When in reality, I can study for a night, do well on a test, and forget it the next day. So I think criticism needs to be almost based more on soft skills. I think that when I do a math test and I get a good grade, I'd still like feedback. I still want responses. Kindness is always great. Positive feedback is appreciated, but constructive criticism I also think is really helpful. So I think not necessarily completely disable the system, but maybe begin to integrate soft skills and communication into the grading system. And I think that this will help a lot with criticism in the way that students are able to grow.
Yeah, I agree. Another thing that I think is important in the feedback aspect is kind of understanding. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. Kind of making sure that we're also getting hands-on experience and other ways to understand the knowledge, and not just kind of, here's the material, here's this, read this textbook or read this chapter, understand this and take the test. Like Catherine said, we can understand the topic and then forget it the next day. Kind of making sure that that feedback kind of helps us work through it in multiple ways, and making sure that we're understanding it in ways that are like physical, like we're able to work through a problem, maybe like word problems, or kind of, instead of just reading it and doing it, we can maybe model it, kind of draw it out, talk through it, kind of making sure that we're also being able to visualize the knowledge that we're learning. So maybe kind of changing that aspect does kind of help us learn the knowledge, especially because people learn in different ways. So making sure that everyone is being able to learn equally and understand the concepts that is being taught in schools. So
I think an important part of feedback is being able to actually employ whatever feedback so you can make a change. And I think a lot of times when we're given feedback, we don't have the opportunity to do that. Like in school, we take tests and we're given feedback, and then we don't ever see it again unless we have an exam like months away. And because of that, we don't really have a chance to utilize that feedback. And I think that goes for other forms of feedback.
So now that we've kind of discussed how the education system has dealt with not only feedback and social skills, what are some suggestions that you guys personally have for improving social skills training in schools, whether it's more public speaking focused or allowing students to work more in group discussions? What is sort of the next step so that we can make sure that as a generation we have a solid toolbox of social skills?
I'm happy to go. Oh, sorry, Darby, do you want to go?
Yeah, I don't have much. Mine's very short. So, I think it's important that whatever classes we're in, the curriculum has, I guess, assignments or exercises that aren't just like papers or tests and whatnot. Like Samik said, discussions and public speaking and requiring different things like that. Of I guess in high school, I really haven't had many classes like that. Um, but the ones that I have were really good, and those classes are ones that I remember really well. I think being able to use those skills in class, like discussing and having teamwork where you have to overcome problems and learn to communicate with other people and develop those soft skills, that's when you best learn the content, and it's when you actually form those skills. So I think having that as part of the actual curriculum would be helpful.
I completely agree with Darby. So I feel like I've been kind of critical of the education system for a lot of the time, but I do really feel like that our modern education system does a decent job of emphasizing soft skills. So like Darby said, I feel like there is a substantial emphasis on collaboration and communication within schools. So I know I mentioned before, but I've taken like entire classes focused on critical thinking and problem solving. And we'd be given a problem and we'd spend the entire class just talking with one another, and trying to figure out the problem. And it was amazing. And it definitely built a foundation, for who I am and what I want to be in the future as a lawyer. So I think that was amazing. I also think that the modern education system does a good job of emphasizing the importance of leadership. So, for example, today, we're all leaders. We're here on this board, we're leading discussions, and that's amazing. And I think that's something that students of the past really just haven't had the opportunity to experience. And as leaders today, look at what we're doing. We're spending 2 hours talking to one another. And I think that's another great way as leaders that we're emphasizing soft skills. And I think really there are entire organizations like DECA, FBLA, the National Honor Society. These things are brand new within the last couple of decades, and almost the entire core principles of these foundations and these organizations is communication, is collaboration, is networking. So I think that is a testament to the fact that we really do prioritize soft skills, and it's not perfect, but it's definitely growing towards improvement.
I definitely agree with what has been said, with like especially what Catherine said about how it's definitely improving, and there's definitely changes that are being made to kind of target all audiences, and I think schools are definitely kind of still working out the changes of implementing skills and ways that they can teach students to make sure that they're also learning soft skills and social skills, especially through like extracurriculars, academic wise, and especially like making sure that they have that opportunity to engage in activities that are both what they're passionate about, but also allows them to engage, collaborate with others, network, make connections that will form connections in the future that will help them, especially in like the workplace, through how to like navigate problems and like teamwork. And definitely they are working through that in schools, but making sure like they kind of understand the student side of it or the youth side of it is something that they should probably think about to make sure that they're targeting every with
I think that's pretty fascinating, and I think that kind of moves our discussion towards something that Catherine had also brought up. It was that nowadays in education, it was like always memorizing for tests and kind of regurgitating information. And I think that kind of brings the discussion how do we think creative work is being affected by the current focus on like root academic achievement? And Catherine brought up a great example just because she kind of brought up how her class forced her to think creatively or forced her to have that sort of critical thinking. So I'm kind of curious to see how do you guys think creative work is being affected?
I kind of have a two-sided answer to this question. Um, so interestingly enough, I was also excited to see this question, but about 2 years ago, I participated in forensics and I like wrote and memorized this 10-minute speech. And I did my entire speech on the creativity crisis in modern education systems. And I essentially talked about what I just talked about, which is this terrible issue of memorizing information, regurgitating it, and forgetting it. And I think that this is an issue and something that needs to be confronted. But on the other hand, I will say that in many ways, my desire to succeed academically has pushed me to be really creative. So I always aimed for top schools and I wanted to succeed academically. And this really encouraged me to push the bounds. And so I came up with innovative ideas, creative things I hadn't thought had been done before. I was publishing research on new ideas. I was writing books. I was founding things that had not been done at all. And I think that I absolutely would not have been encouraged to do any of this or would have felt the need to do any of this if it weren't for the pressure to succeed academically. So I have sort of a two-sided answer. On one hand, I think that it's terrible and that I think that a lot of information that I've learned, I've just regurgitated and forgotten about. On the other hand, I did a lot of things that I don't think I would have done otherwise. And for that, I'm grateful. But I think it is a unique problem that needs to be addressed in a unique way.
I agree with Catherine. I think like the focus on academic achievement isn't just getting good grades, it's also becoming a well-rounded person and engaging in creative pursuits. And I lost my train of thought, but I think I was going to basically what Catherine said, schools aren't just looking for students who have done well, they also want students who are well-rounded and indicate the ability to think creatively and in the future will be able to make an impact. And yeah, I keep losing my train of thought, but that's essentially what I was going to say.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with the both of them. The fact that we also mentioned that social entrepreneurship has been for many that avenue for creative achievement or creative work, and that many people think that social impact or social concern is their way to not only give back, but also think critically in helping the society, especially with the focus on balancing not only academic achievement, but also attending to both social concern and being able to express yourselves creatively. A lot of like if you look in the news these days, a lot of not only like even law schools or even medical schools, they have turned their first 2 years into pass fail, which lets the students focus more on getting sort of that interaction. Especially in law school, it's a lot about public speaking and making your cases, while in medical school is making sure that you're able to interact with patients and know that clinical nature. So you're not just memorizing information, because at the end of the day, anyone can memorize information if they really put their mind to it. But it's the true people who are able to interact with people and understand people's issues and be able to present them or treat them or diagnose them or etc. So I think that's a really interesting aspect of how we're taking forward both the balance and creative work and academic achievement. If no one has any closing words, Jennifer, do you want to close off on this topic before we move on to the next one?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm thank you for the rich conversation and for thinking through the ways that the linearness in some ways, or the test result of the education system and the drive to that has also created the capacity for other creative outlets outside of that, or the pressure to achieve has created some creative work. Um, that's an interesting aspect of the conversation that I wasn't expecting necessarily. The other piece, so there are quite profound differences generationally in your experience of the world than the one before you, in terms of the education system, which you guys all pointed to, and No Child Left Behind driving testing since the 90s, and there not being a generation of teachers in schools that remember what it was like to teach before that. So some of the ways that education was structured in advance of that test-driven modality. And then the other piece is the implementation of the iPhone in the world in 2007 was the beginning of your time in the world, and just the rise of media and the rise of the presence of technology in your world, and that always being true. There's some implications for how people interact, how they feel about other being both surveilled and evaluated all the time, and that's just led to some rise in the erosion of some social skills, because we aren't necessarily interfacing face to face, or the erosion of kindness, because it's how you behave behind a screen is different from how you might behave face to face. But it's also created this increase in social anxiety and media surveillance. And so I'm just curious uh, how you guys are dealing with that world. And I know that Somik, you probably wanted to step, but I'm so curious to jump into this question. How is it that you're feeling about that shift in the reality of our society and what that has meant for you?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. And that brings us to our next topic of social anxiety and media surveillance. And the question Jennifer essentially posed was, how do we as peers and also kind of pioneers of our generation deal with constant social surveillance, whether it's kind of being cautious or cognizant of how we're appearing on social media, whether it's not even just Instagram or Facebook or whatever, but even professional platforms like LinkedIn. It's a very common notion in our generation to kind of continuously think, oh, how am I being perceived? Or how am I getting these many likes or these many follows or these many connections, etc. So it is a very big topic in today's generation. So we're curious to see if people would share their thoughts on this. If no one wants to jump in immediately, which is completely fine, I can definitely add on to this. I feel like in today's world, social anxiety has particularly been associated with social media. A lot of uh, what I see in terms of like clinical, but also just in general in life is that a lot of people face cyberbullying or like a lot of social media pressure, which causes them to deal with anxiety, depression, PTSD, etc. So it's definitely carrying that negative notion, but at the same time, surviving a life without social media is becoming less and less impossible. A lot of people are just there it's just needed in today's society, and that's almost a fact. And I feel like in today's age, being under that constant surveillance has become sort of a norm that a lot of us are having to deal with. And like we talked about before, the constructive feedback is also being affected, right? How do we kind of make sure that we're not adding to that sort of anxiety that we're already dealing with from social media? So it's definitely a topic of concern and also a topic that brings up our well-being and mental health.
All right, I can chime in. Thanks, Salmik, for going first, because I remember I looked at this question and the one note that I had was that I don't have a great answer. And I really don't, because I think like as youth, we're experiencing this currently. It's hard to have an answer to something that you're experiencing and going through. But something that Salmik said did trigger an idea in my head. And so Salmik made this mention of social pressure, peer pressure on social media. And I will say, as a girl, something that I've become especially cognizant of is the issue of body image on social media and the way that that causes anxiety, especially in young girls. So I think that the solution to this, and it sounds simple, but it really isn't, is to try and separate reality from social media. And it sounds impossible because of how ingrained media is in modern society. But I think it's important to take into account the fact that people put themselves on social media the way that they want to be perceived, and they want to be perceived as perfect. So it's important to separate these perfect media accounts and these perfect people on social media from reality. And I think that this idea of perfectness, which is of course not achievable, has kind of contaminated the way that we view ourselves and the way that body image exists in the modern world. So I think that really it's just important to separate reality from media. Sounds simple, but it's not.
I agree with Catherine. I think social media it's a really big part of people's lives, especially after COVID and the pandemic, and people were stuck online for so long. But I think people just need to develop a healthy way to engage with it. Like Catherine said, separate it from reality. And I think a big thing is also not engaging in it too much. Of course, I mean, to some extent, it's good. It really is. But like, things can always be excessive. And I think it's important to stay away from that, especially with social media.
I think that brings us to our last question on this topic, and that's probably the most interesting, I think. A lot of our people, whether it's hiring force or just the generation older than us, has labeled us often as fragile. So it is, especially given the rise in social media and anxiety and whatever, how do we overcome this stereotype in the workplace or in the education sector or whatever industry? But it is, how do we kind of make sure that we're not labeled continuously as a fragile generation?
This is sort of a hard question to answer, but I can try. So I think it's important for us. I think the first step would be as a younger generation to realize the fact that there is no precedent to what we are experiencing, and that the older generations who are labeling us as fragile have absolutely no experience or no interaction with social media in the way that they do. So they simply cannot understand what we're going through. So I think it's a first step to recognize that they can label us as fragile when they don't even understand our problems. So then I think the second step, and it's essentially a reiteration of what I've just said, is to begin moving past And I know it sounds simple and it's not, but moving past the anxiety that social media causes by trying to separate reality from from this perfectness that exists on social media. And it sounds simple, but it's not a simple solution. I think that those are our first couple of steps.
I really want you guys to dig into this one. I'm so curious. I liked your answer, Catherine. There's no precedent for our experience. So what if you were to then describe, and this can be for anyone to answer, what is that experience? What is it and people don't know what they don't know, they haven't lived through it. But if you were to provide a framework that would just help somebody in a different generation understand what that is, what are the pressures? What has it been like to grow up in your world?
I can take this one again, and it's something that I think I keep bringing up on this topic, but I think social media, there's this overwhelming perfectness in every aspect of social media because everyone puts themselves out there the way that they want to be perceived, and they want to be perceived as perfect. So then us as young people, we're looking at these perfect people, and then there's this inevitable comparison that occurs, and we want to be like that person, and then we fault ourselves for not being like that person, and it creates this disconnect in our heads. And it's a struggle. It is a real struggle. So I can use a personal example. I was really stressed about college admissions and college, the whole application process for forever. And so I would stalk social media accounts on TikTok, looking at people who are getting in. And this inevitable comparison occurred. And I was thinking to myself, well, why aren't I doing that? Why can't I do that? Why aren't my grades that good? Why isn't my SAT score that good? And it was this problem, and I know many people experience this in different ways. Why doesn't my body look like that? All sorts of things, and it creates this problem that I don't think an older generation can understand because they didn't experience that level of perfectness emanating from everyone. And so I don't know if the explanation quite does it justice, but it's the perfectness and then the inevitable comparison that subsequently occurs.
I think something to add on to that, which I agree with you, Catherine, that idea of perfectness, that we have to fit into the mold that society creates as what we are supposed to be perceived as. And I think another thing to add on to that is probably this constant fear of judgment from others is something that adds into why we force ourselves to fit into this idea of perfectness and creating that idea that we're perfect or trying to fit our body in or make changes to our body or make changes to how we act or how we dress or how we talk to people is kind of just because we're kind of scared or we're kind of scared of how people will perceive us or react if we're not perfect, as Catherine was saying, if like we're not seen as this perfect person who has everything put together, who's so academically and in all aspects successful. So I think kind of older generations are unable to kind of comprehend that version that is being created by social media because they haven't been able to grow up in a way or grow up in a world where that is constantly in the minds of these younger generations of how we have to act. Everything, like even down to the way that we talk or speak or how everything is being judged, we kind of feel like we're constantly being surveillance on media. And so kind of I think it's just being labeled as a fragile generation because it is kind of um, disconnected because we're not able to come to terms with how we are as individuals instead of trying to compare ourselves to other people and kind of make sure that we're connected in a way that isn't how we are actually. So I feel like that's just because we're so disconnected from the reality of ourselves and how we are on social media.
So I really appreciate the sharing from all of that. Thank you very much. One of the things that I find hard is actually that language. So when I come across it with my colleagues or in the HR world or in leadership world, of that, the labeling of a group, it always bothers me. But because I don't experience this generation as fragile, I experience this generation as coming up and coming of age in wildly different times and in harder times than we have had in a number of generations in our sort of Western American context. So that's not necessarily true for people in other parts of the globe, but I think in this world, and there's just been a variety of external forces and, political, social, technological, all of the above, economic, that there's this actual, I don't know if it's fragility as much as it is this over functioning of awareness of how you're being perceived as an outside, as just, that must be exhausting, as all I have to say. It's just that must be exhausting.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree that it's up to our generation to kind of make sure that we are interpreted in the right context and we're also thriving in today's changing world. And I think that brings us to our next discussion, or our last discussion topic, which is the automation of future jobs, and especially how changing times affect not only our social pressures, but also our employment opportunities, and especially the job market. So I'm curious to kind of glean into two questions. One is, what are your thoughts on the automation of jobs and its impact on future employment? And the second question would be, any advice that you would like to give to someone entering college now who is considering this future job market?
We talked about this a little bit earlier, covered it a little bit, talking about AI. I think there's going to be a lot of the jobs that are automated will be ones that are repetitive, like being a cashier and checking people out. And I think in that way, there will be some displacement. But like Catherine said earlier, there's going to be a boom in the cyber industry, and there's going to be a lot of new jobs in that area relating to automation and AI. So I think that students who are looking to go into college should try to develop the skills that AI and automated jobs can't cover, like critical thinking and problem solving with different perspectives. So I guess for college, that could mean multiple things, but it could mean interdisciplinary learning or even just getting experience in internships and whatnot.
I agree completely with everything Darby said. So I think it's safe to say that the automation of industries is almost completely inevitable. And it can sound scary, but I think that it'll give way to trends that are both positive and negative. So for one, I know this is something Darby just mentioned, this is something I mentioned earlier, but I think that there will be a major boom in cyber fields and technology fields, which is interesting, and that's going to be a revolutionary entire industry. So that'll provide so many jobs. But then it does go back to another problem that we discussed earlier, where we may lose people in our workforce, may lose jobs because they're being replaced. So I think, again, it goes back to the idea of finding a balance between efficiency, new technology, as well as the good of the people and the welfare of the people. And I think society has to proceed with an understanding of this, and that definitely goes into college and pursue and what you pursue in college. So almost exactly like Darby said, I think that's important for these younger generations, these upcoming generations, to emphasize skills that cannot be replicated or duplicated by these soft skills, social skills like problem solving, critical thinking, comprehension, communication, collaboration. And as we inherit the world, power and leadership positions are going to fall to the people who have both experience with tech and technology, as well as the social skills. And this will create a powerful group of leaders in the world. As far as college and going into college, my advice is to find something that is practical, but also something you love. Make sure that your job cannot be stolen in the future by technology or AI, but make sure that you're also doing something that you love while practicing these soft skills that will be so vital in the future.
I definitely agree with everything that has been said, especially what Catherine said about how the automation of jobs is definitely inevitable. And I think kind of just tackling it as a situation where there is still that human perspective or that human touch to AI and the automation of jobs that is lacking in the technology department. So it's definitely possible where we can still develop those skills like communication, collaboration, and still make sure that there are jobs for people to uh, work in AI on both sides of the equation. So there are jobs that are being completely replaced, but kind of lacking in um, the skills, the soft skills of people. So I think there are still developments that can be made where humans are still being involved, and unemployment is definitely being affected, but it can definitely be mitigated if we can create or we can find that perfect balance between the automation of jobs and still incorporating the humans into that aspect. So that kind of goes into what both Catherine and Darby said about the advice for college students or people who are going into that kind of just developing those skills, making sure that you are kind of pursuing what you're passionate about, but also developing the soft skills and technological skills to make sure that you are prepared for any situation that'll occur in the future, based on like the technological advancements of our society.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone captured it quite well, and I feel like the biggest advice we can all probably give is continuing to pursue those social skills because that is what is looking to kind of become the standout factor in today's world. Those who have those people skills and social skills are really standing out in the market and also becoming better humans. And like Catherine mentioned, you should carry those social skills, but also have something that you're passionate about. And the combination of both is what will really put you far in today's, not only in the market, but just in general in life. And I think this is a great way to close. So if anyone else has other closing takeaways, please feel free to chime in. And then me and Jennifer will close out. Okay. If no one else has any other words, then we can definitely close off. So just want to kind of recap that this was definitely something that really took some effort to put together. So thank you to everyone who came today. And also thank you to Prince. He was definitely a big part of this. He helped in setting up the technical aspect and how we need to plan everything that on our end. So that was definitely a big factor. And in terms of today's discussion, I'd just like to say that it has been a quite an amazing opportunity to work with all of you over the past 2 years, and especially being pioneers of youth voices. It's definitely been something. So it's clear that our emerging generation is kind of poised to navigate and shape our evolving world. We have, like we talked, we need to embrace our social skills, adapt to these technological advancements, and at the same time, stay driven to causes that not only matter to us, but that matter to those who are around us and those to who we care for. So I think that has been one of the biggest takeaways from today's conversation. So the next generation who is listening keenly on this video, I'd say, is it's your voices and actions that are essential in creating a future market that involves both the empathy and the human touch that we talked about, but at the same time, holding that torch of meaningful change.
And from my point of view, the ability to center youth conversation and to simply listen with curiosity as opposed to assumptions or judgment, to see the ideas that rise and the interdisciplinary approach that I heard from each one of you as you're thinking about your own futures and the future landscape of our society, but also how you hope leaders are engaging with these questions in the future. That is such an important piece of accountability. I really hope that leaders spend more time giving their attention to the conversations that you all want to have, and to simply listening to your concerns about how we're shaping the future and what the implications are for the world you're going to inherit.